The Zionist experiment, which resulted in the creation of the State of Israel, was in many ways launched by the 1897 Maccabean pilgrimage, an expedition led by London lawyer Herbert Bentwich and a delegation of 19 British and American Jews. Against all odds, the nation that these men and women helped assemble stands today. Bentwich's great-grandson, Ari Shavit, believes the survival of Israel is not a foregone conclusion. He is a leading journalist and columnist for Haaretz and the author of the superb new book on his homeland called My Promised Land, The Triumph and Tragedy of Israel. As a 47-year-old Jew, I can certainly state that this is the best book that I have ever read in my lifetime about Israel and Zionism. Appearing in conversation with Ari Shavit is David Remnick, editor-in-chief of The New Yorker since 1998 and Pulitzer Prize-winning author of 6 books, most recently, The Bridge, The Life and Rise of Barack Obama. Please join me in welcoming Ari and David to the JCCSF.
David, Ari. Just so we have that straight, and welcome to our production of 2 middle-aged Jews telling jokes. We're here all week. Before I begin, I just want to tell you that what your fearless leader is telling you about the book is no joke. It warms my heart to see that such a book, even without, I think, being reviewed in San Francisco at all, is number 3 on the nonfiction bestseller list, in which I somehow think is due to the power not only of NPR and the New York Times, but to your own good sense. And I thank you for paying attention to this book, which is, I'm in complete agreement, the most remarkable book that I've read about a source of enormous interest to me, and I know to you. And I would like to begin, Ari, by introducing you to the audience in a way by way of biography, who you are, what formed the impulse for this book, by asking first about your family. Where do you come from ideologically, a little bit about your background, just to give a sense to these people who will, I hope, read this book, who the author of it is.
Well, I will try to answer the question, but first, it's really, really pleasure and honor to be here. I've loved your town for a very long time, throughout my life. I didn't have that many visits here, but I loved them all. And I appreciated not only San Francisco's beauty, but San Francisco values from afar. So to be here tonight is a real privilege. And to be here with David, who's in many ways the godfather of this book, makes me really excited at the beginning. First of all, if you ask about myself, and I think I'm not of much importance, but as part of this story, I'm an unusual Ashkenazi Israeli, because as the book tells, my mother's family came from Britain. My father's family has been a long time in Palestine, so I'm 8th generation Palestine in that sense. I do not have the Holocaust, for instance, in my background. I have it very much in my mind, but I don't have it as part of my background. And if you need to define me politically, which I suppose is what you want, I think that throughout my life, I grew up in the peace movement and the human rights movement. Actually, one of my previous visits to this town was to raise money for ACRI, the Association of Civil Rights in Israel. And this is the town to do this.
This was in the 80s, 90s?
This is late 90s. Mm-hmm. But I think that perhaps what makes me different than some other colleagues of mine is that I'm deeply liberal. I think I'm a deep peacenik. I really want peace desperately. But rather early on, I realized there is a struggle between my values and the brutal reality I live in. And I think that I've been trying for decades now to struggle honestly with this. And I think this tension or contradiction is definitely essential to understand Israel. I think perhaps it might be even a bit relevant to America. So if you need, some people describe me as a left of center, radical centrist, all kinds of terms. I think that the point is that one, that I'm totally liberal, totally progressive, totally peacenik, but I opened my eyes some years back to see how harsh the reality of the Middle East is, how harsh and how tragic the conflict is, and as a result of that, my views became somewhat idiosyncratic. And
all right, well, let's break this down, because that's saying a lot and begs a lot of different questions. It begs a historical question, a view of how Israel came into being, what Zionism is from your point of view. Zionism is a word that in certain quarters is lionized. In certain quarters, it's just the opposite. It's a word of opprobrium in certain ways. In your view, do you feel that the left in Israel, Haaretz readers, Tel Avivites, people who live in the bubble, people who vote for Meretz and to some degree Labor, are ignorant of or naive about the neighborhood they live in?
I think that this tension I talked about is one that is very difficult to deal with. But I'll tell you, and I'll answer a question by saying why really I felt this need to write this book. Because I have a feeling that we really, not only the people on the left, all Israelis and most others who are concerned about Israel, whether they love Israel or hate Israel, have lost sight of the big picture. I think that we lost our narrative. Israel is a remarkable place that was a story before it was an entity. But as the entity developed, as we became a very strong physical reality, we lost the context, we lost the narrative. And my attempt here, somewhat audacious, was to rewrite the narrative, to say to people, especially to my tribe, the liberal tribe, but to all that are concerned, look at what really happened there, look at what was achieved there, be honest about the flaws, criticizes as it should be, what should be criticized, but see what a man-made miracle this is. So going back to my great-grandfather, which was mentioned, the fact that he's not the important figure, but the founders of Zionism, the fact that they in the late 19th century they did not know there will be an Auschwitz, but they tried to preempt Auschwitz. They tried to save European Jewry from catastrophe. And the fact that they were aware of the challenges that this community faces now in the post-ghetto world, these were two brilliant insights that made Zionism brilliant and ingenious in many ways. Now, the fact that following these insights, these people led the most dramatic revolution possible. They transferred the people from one continent to another. They established a nation. They took a land. They revived the language. And they created this very amazing phenomena Israel is. That is remarkable. And with all the criticism of occupation, and I'm an anti-occupation guy, and of settlements, and I'm an anti-settlements guy, one should not lose sight of that remarkable achievement, and one should give it all the credit. Having said that...
The verb you used was took. Took a land.
Absolutely. And that's the other side of it. And I think that, what I tried to do in the book is to be loving while being very critical and very realistic. I think that one of the problems in the conversation about Israel in this country, in Europe, and in Israel itself, that we went into these extremism where you can either do Israel bashing all day long, or you do Israel idolizing all day long. As if either some people cannot see anything right and good about the country, some think that there is no flaw whatsoever. And I go to try, I touch the fire. I touch Israel's deepest taboos in this book.
Which are?
Definitely the Palestinian issue. I mean, it begins with the fact that my great-grandfather and his peers did not see that the land of our ancient forefathers was taken by another people. They did not see the other people who were there.
How is that possible?
Look, I try to explain it in the book, and I say that, again, to be fair to them, you have to understand that, contrary to some of the fashionable thinking, there was no Palestinian people there. There was not only that there was no Palestinian nation, the Palestinians defined themselves as a nation, as a people, decades later, and partly
but you're not saying that Palestinian people weren't there. You're saying that Palestinian
of course.
Palestinian nationalism is a result of Zionism.
Had you asked the Palestinian whom my great-grandfather did not see, what is he would have told you, I'm an Arab. The word Palestinian did not exist. So in this sense, there was no political, there were beginnings, but there was no political, the Palestinian national movement evolved decades later. So they did not conquer a nation that was politically defined. The Middle East was in political chaos or kind of undefined state. And so that explains part of the blindness. But beyond that, I think that what I try to claim in the book, that when I try to understand what happened, is that the need to go there, because the Jewish people needed Palestine at the time, needed to build that homeland so much, they were so desperate to create it, and the need was a justified one, they did not see the other. As a result of that, you see these two pillars of Israel. That's the triumph and the tragedy. On the one hand, a remarkable, astonishing achievement. And on the other hand, an ongoing conflict that so many American presidents and Secretary of States tried to solve and resolve, and it won't be solved and resolved because it's such a deep, multi-layer conflict, probably one of the most difficult around on this globe.
Do you allow yourself to use the word colonialism to describe the early experience?
I have I'm angered when people describe Zionism and colonialism. But I'll begin with trying to understand it. Some of the methods used resembled the methods of other nations or other places were colonial projects like Algeria and others. But to say that these people were the ultimate victims of Europe, were imperialists and colonialists, is outrageous. It's outrageous. They were trying to save a most desperate people possible. They were not sent by an empire, and they did not go to rob or steal a land that they had no connection to. It is our ancient homeland, and the need to create Israel was a deep need. I mean, when you look at Israel, it's really against all odds. It is there, thriving, endangered, but thriving. If it was some phony colonialist endeavor, it would not have succeeded. The fact when I go, the end of the book, and I go in the footsteps of my great-grandfather, and I see many flaws, but when I see it, the amazing achievement, how different towns that were nothing became so thriving, when actually the role of saving the Jews, that did happen. When you see that, you realize that the need to have Israel was a deep need. And in my mind, it's the ultimate justification for Israel's existence. So while I'm aware of the flaws, and I'm aware of the sins, and I'm aware of the dark sides that many, usually pro-Israelis, try to hide, I'm honest about it. But I do not think that this actually means that Israel is morally flawed. On the contrary, the basis of it, Israel, I think in universal terms, no, I'm saying it not only as a Jew, as an Israeli, in universal terms, the need to have Israel and the justification for Israel's existence, in my mind, is absolute.
Mm-hmm. I should say that the book is structured in many ways. Thematically, it has an exquisite structure, but there's a very simple, and the simplest structures are the hardest to find, I find, as a writer and editor. But there's a series of distinct historical moments telling this story that, in fact, begin with Ari's great-grandfather and bring us to, in effect, last week. The New Yorker published an excerpt of this book, in some quarters, maybe one of the more controversial ones. I think, in a sense, it's part of the whole, about Leda. Tell us about that. Tell us why it produced the outrage it did on the left and on the right.
I thought it was mostly on the right.
Well, I'll supply the left-wing critique.
You just don't read the right, so you don't know.
It depends what blog site you look at, what website you look at. Google gets you everywhere. That was for free, by the way.
Look, this is, I think Leda is challenging in many ways. And
You should probably tell the story, too.
well, the city of Leda is a Palestinian city in mid-Israel. When your plane comes down and lands in Ben Gurion Airport, it circles over Leda. It's right next to Tel Aviv, the very epicenter of the country, as the New Yorker defined it. And in 1948, in July of 1948, one has to remember that the War of 48, in the beginning, the Jews, the Zionists, were very weak, endangered. The Arab nations invaded, they were much more powerful, but within very few months, we became much stronger. Our army developed one of these Israeli miracles. You know, the army was built during war, and by July, we were much stronger, and the Israeli defense forces already surrounded the city of Leda, conquered it, and drove the population away. Within the process, there was a massacre in what is described as the small mosque of Leda. Most Zionists have a problem saying this story for exactly the reasons I described before. Because if you have humane, liberal, progressive values, this is something that is difficult to deal with. So the easy way out is to pretend it never happened. And this is basically what our mental history was about. We tried to erase that part of our history. And this is why this is so, I think this chapter is so tense, because on the one hand, first of all, I described the fact that Zionism entered this area, the Valley of Leda, in the most heart-warming and inspiring way. There was a youth village created there that was Zionism at the very best. I mean, I hope people will read the book. I don't want to quote it. It's the Zionism...
They can't forget it.
It's a Zionism that anyone would love. And the tragedy that because of this flaw, because of the conflict that followed, there was this existential threat from both sides, and at the end of the day, it was the sword that decided the fate of the land. And I talked to the people who did that, who were there. Most of them have passed away, but I interviewed them some 20 years ago. And I think on the one hand, I described the brutality, the cruelty of it, but I try to understand where it comes from. I mean, this was not people who just vicious and sadistic, and they were caught in a tragedy. They were caught in a tragedy. Now, I have arguments with people on the right and left in the reactions, so let's begin with the people on the left.
But if you'll forgive me, the left-wing critique is not so much the description. They're saying, well, bravo, Shavit is joining the new historians.
But they're using it. They're using it. And this
but then they say the passage in which you say, and this is the crucial and I think the most controversial passage, at least of that excerpt, maybe of the book, is that when you say that there would be no Israel without Leda,
and I say that I stand with the damned.
You stand with the damned, that without their sins, that your children are left with no place. How do you justify that?
Look, so that's my anger with the left, that they are trying to use this in a way that some people, not on the extreme left, some use it in a way that is wrong. Because I dare touch the fire and write about it and talk about it in depth, and this was really the most painful chapter to write. But let's put it in context. the context is, one, it was the Arabs who were not willing to have a Jewish state. Two, wherever the Arabs won, not one Jew remained, and many, many atrocities happened. Three, in the 40s, millions, if not tens of millions, the 40s are not the 21st century. There were refugees and there was population mobilization everywhere. I mean, everywhere, wherever there was war, especially in Europe. So, and definitely, I'm not going to never mind what the Nazis did, but you know, Dresden was much worse than Leda, and that was done by the Brits. And what happened to the German population in the Sudeten and in part of East Poland was much worse. So when people single out Israel, single out the Jews, I'm angry because there is an element there of not willing to accept. Look, I do not want to talk about this country in which I'm a guest, but
go ahead.
Canadian liberalism.
The hell with Canadians.
Canadian liberalism, Australian liberalism, and New Zealand liberalism is based on the fact that the other is gone. How come the other is gone? It did not disappear itself. So to be so righteous in Australia, New Zealand, and Canada and say, oh, these Jews did Leda?
And so what's the conclusion you draw from that critique?
I'll have to refer to the right wing as well. So to
Finish
leave it
this.
But look, I think there is, on the one hand, I think that because there was a too sweet and pretty picture, there was an Israel postcard or a Zionist postcard for so many years, when people discover that it's not quite as sweet as it was presented, they have rage and understandable criticism. But
isn't that the natural course of this happened in this country over a longer period of time? History textbooks about the American history have changed radically. Textbooks in Israel have changed radically, especially since the late 80s. I guess the 80s would have been the period of the new historians. You know, even the description of slavery has it. When is the first time we've really seen a truly violent film about American slavery? Made by a Brit this year. This year. So this is not unique to Israel.
So here, let me be a good old-fashioned Jew. I think that some people, I mean, again, people should have the right to criticize Israel. People should criticize Israel when Israel does wrong. It should. But I'm aware of the fact that in some quarters, there is some of the problems that the Jewish individual, the Jewish had in the past, the Jewish collective has in the present. Some people have a difficulty in accepting Jewish use of force when they see others using force, and that troubles me. So our role is, in my mind, is to do what I try to do in the book, to be honest, to be self-critical, to look at things as they are. But I think that one should not be naive and see the way that some others are using this. And just to say a word about the right-wing reactions, I really think what I tried to do in the book is really to love Israel in a new way, which is critical, realistic, and moral as much as I can. I think this is the only way to bring Israel back from the cliché. And I'm afraid that many people on the right who are trying to preserve the cliché and trying to overprotect Israel are killing the ability of young American Jews and young Americans who are not Jews and young Europeans to relate to Israel. Because if you create something that is mythical, no one can really love it. So the real way to love Israel is to go through these difficulties, to go through the mud and the sweat and the blood and the tears. And in my mind, in this sense, I'm such a great lover of that country. At the end of the day, you would love it in an amazing way. But if you fake it, you get fake love. and fake love won't last.
I think the chapter that probably exemplifies Ari Shavit's love for this country, well, it's imbued in the entire book, but there's a chapter that comes after Leda, which is about the 50s. I wish you could describe that. That's
the chapter one should not say it about chapters because like kids, you know, who's your beloved one, but that's probably my beloved chapter. So please read the entire book, but if you have only one chapter, go for that one. And it's no coincidence that it follows Leda. I mean, first of all, that was the timeline, but it was right to put things in context after. Because the chapter about of 1957, about the 50s, I think that was probably my greatest discovery. How heroic Israel of the 50s was. Usually people talk about Israeli heroism, whether they like it or criticize it, in context of wars. But between us, there have been much worse wars than ours, thank God. And there was a lot of combat heroism by Americans, Europeans, Russians. Ours is not much better than that. But the civilian heroism of the 50s, when you have 650,000 people absorbing over 1 million within a very short time, that's like America today absorbing 700 million within 3, 4, 5 years. And the fact that the country did not collapse. Now, who were these people who came? Most of them were human wrecks. Most of them could not sleep at night. They had nightmares, they had fears, they were haunted people. And I described the life stories of 3, 4 individuals, among them the writer Aaron Appelfeld, Professor Zev Sternal, Judge Aaron Barak. And when you see what these people have been through, where they've come to, and they arrive in Israel, and they open up to the sun, to the oranges, to the hope, to the blue skies. And I don't think that anyone with any human feelings can remain indifferent to that. This is a remarkable story of these are the ultimate victims, the ultimate refugees, the ultimate survivors who came to a country that was fragile and small, surrounded by enemies. And within a few years, they built a state. But because I deal with the larger picture and analyze it, but I concentrate at the end of this one, what I call the housing estate. And the life stories of these, I go like flat by flat, apartment by apartment. And you see every family, and the one that I think I care about most, in a sense, that although each one is impossible to grasp, is the person who was responsible for the Mengele twins in Auschwitz, because he was a bit older, and Mengele chose himself personally to take care of them. And at the end of the war, he goes around Europe and spreads the surviving twins, after all the tests went to their homes in Czechoslovakia and Hungary. And then he marries in Prague of 45, 46, and comes to Israel in 49 with his wife and a 2-year-old daughter. And he becomes an accountant in the Israel's Kamari Theater. And when you think of what this person went through, and he's the hero, much more than the pilots and the soldiers and even the pioneers. That kind of heroism, that quiet heroism of people moving forward, not going for hate, not going for suicide bombing, not trying to having revenge, violent revenge. Their revenge was to live, to move on. And in this sense, this is the remarkable side of Israel. And if there is one wish I have, is that Israel will go back to that amazing spirit of the 50s, of this kind of optimism and life-loving spirit within dramatic circumstances and after such a tragic past. I think we have it in us, but this is like the Israel that I deeply love, and I think that this is, in many ways, the real essence of Israel.
I'm guessing by the room, there's no demographic survey that I've taken, but I'm guessing that certain people in this room, maybe a lot of them, have similar memories. In 1967, while this country was going through extraordinary turmoil, of any number of kinds, good, bad, and different, the war in Vietnam, sexual revolution, rise of all kinds of currents, there occurs in Israel and in the general Middle East the Six-Day War. And I would bet that there are a few people in this audience who experienced that in their youths as a kind of extraordinarily transformative awakening moment, a source of enormous pride. But hidden within it was a poison pill, which was an occupation that has now consumed 2/3 of the life, if not more, of the state of Israel. That is, as you describe in the book, has been a cancer. And by the way, not just for Israel, but for the people who are experiencing the oppression most of all. And year after year goes by, decade after decade goes by. There is no resolution to it for reasons and complicated histories that we can spend 4 nights discussing. But here we are in 2013, and the occupation is doing enormous damage to the state of Israel, to the point where the conversation about a two-state solution is darkening all the time. That American politicians with the sincerest intentions talk about the possibility of it being too late. Arguments on the left about really a binationalism or a one-state solution is the only way out. That at this point, to many people, a two-state solution is kind of a lost romanticism. It's the height of political naivete. What's your view of this? While standing on one foot.
If you allow me, I just want to say something following the previous question, but I will not avoid this one. I think what is very important to remember is that what is true about that Israel of the 50s that I described is in many ways true for the Jews who lived and came to this country. And I think that the story of the 20th century was the most dramatic century in history of the Jews. The first half was the worst ever, for obvious reasons. And the second half was the best ever, because we, with that housing estate and with that spirit of the 50s, built Jewish sovereignty there. And you built this amazing American Jewish community, which is the perfect diaspora, the best diaspora ever the Jews ever had. So the life stories sometimes were actually the same. Now, it's true that in Israel, the amazing thing is there was no America there. We had to create everything. So politically, it was different. But I think that we are, and this is one of the reasons that I'm happy to be in this country, to have the book published and to speak, is we have to address the fact, just as we have to rewrite our narrative, I think that you should be very, very proud of what was achieved by American Jewry in the last 50, 60 years. Jews did not only succeed as individuals here, but what you built here as a community, including this institution we sit in, as a symbol of that, is remarkable. And when we get to talk about the future, my fear or my concern is that both miracles are endangered now, in different ways. But if we want to have a Jewish future both here and there, we progressive, non-Orthodox Jews have to work together, because ultra-Orthodox Judaism will be okay, whether it is in Brooklyn or Belgium or London or wherever.
It's an irony, considering how much of it was decimated in
Exactly,
Europe.
And this is what will lead me to your question. Mm-hmm. And the irony, the tragic irony, that large chunks of Israel were taken by either ultra-Orthodox or extreme nationalist forces that alienate so many of young American Jews and of so much of the American progressive Jewish community. And it's, in my mind, it's almost a life and death question. I mean, when I will talk about, Iran, all that, Israel faces 3 great challenges: Iran, Palestine, and young Jewish kids in American universities. This is what we have to deal with. And we must rewrite the narrative and start to create a new language so we can work together.
You better explain the third quickly, or they're going to freak out. So what do you mean?
I think that, as I said, the Zionist diagnosis was right. You cannot maintain ultra-Orthodox Jewish civilization without a strong anchor as the state of Israel is, as a Jewish national home. But if that national home becomes your embarrassing relative, you cannot relate to it, you cannot love it, you don't know what to do with it, it cannot function as such. So it is absolutely essential for us in Israel to reach out to progressive America. I don't want Tea Party Israel and Tea Party America to be the dominant forces. I want non-Tea Party Israel and non-Tea Party America to work together.
Here's the problem. The political demographic of Israel is working against you. I mean, I don't know, many people here have been to Israel lately, but people who have not, who went when they were young and now just follow it through the Haaretz website or the New York Times or whatever, however you follow it, would they be naive to be, but they'd be astonished to see how completely Orthodox Jerusalem is, how isolated Tel Aviv is, how Russian, it's a very, very different nation. It's a much more conservative place. And you live in Kfar Shmaryahu, which is just north of Tel Aviv, which is, kind of the San Francisco of...
no insults, David.
Yeah, fair enough. And almost as pretty as San Francisco. Play to the home crowd, always. But it's a very different place. Time is not on the side of what you're describing. Birth rates are not on the side.
We're skipping on with that I owe you, but I'll connect the dots. I'll challenge you. I come often to this country. I was in this country a lot between 2000 and 2006, 2007. People kept telling me America became totally conservative. It's controlled by the evangelists. It's all this conservative neocons in power and religious. A year or two passes, Barack Obama is being elected president. I'm not a determinist, not about this country and not about Israel. But I'm not only hopeful, but I'm very angry. Because the reason that Israel looks at it as it looks, Israel still has a sane, reasonable majority. It might be shrinking, but it's still there. And the reason you do not see that expressed, the reason that does not control the country is only one: the complete failure of the center and center-left to produce leadership and to produce new concepts and a new ideology. I mean, it's not, we all miss Ben-Gurion, Roosevelt, Churchill, and whatever. We did not produce a decent Clinton. And it's not only the person. The people on the left in Israel, the leftists, did not rethink the peace concept, did not rethink, they did not rewrite the narrative. I believe that if we do that, if we have the narrative back, if we have new concepts that, again, combine our values but deal with the brutal reality in a constructive way and have the right leadership, we can win back the country just like Rabin did in 1992.
So you're saying the political class in Israel is dreadful?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If there's like Israelis as individuals, they might be rough, neurotic, aggressive, bad drivers, impolite.
You say that like it's a bad thing.
Basically, I really love Israel.
Yeah.
And I have some differences with my wife sometimes about that. But there is something amazing about our life. Look, between wars, we are not only creative, innovative, entrepreneurial, sensual, sexy, vivid. It's life in Israel between wars is great. And when I talk to people, because I've on television in recent years, I go to the streets, I talk to a lot of people. They talk to me. People are sensible. The racist elements, the fundamental estimates are still marginal. And the fact that we are hostage to these forces and we never found a way to reach out to build the center, to build this silent majority of Israeli sensibility and turn it into political power is totally the result of the failure of the political class.
The racist elements may be marginal, but the co-option of the pioneering spirit by the settlers is not marginal.
Well, I'm not, look, so let's deal now with the question we skipped. I mean, I see the settlement project as one of the three greatest threats to Israel's future. And personally, I'm not a settler bashing guy. I think that even my chapter about the settlers, I try to understand them. By the way, I wish my tribe, so to speak, had the talent and commitment that their leaders had. They did amazing work for their people. I think it's killing us. But many of them, on a personal level, are impressive individuals. But this is definitely one of the critical challenges we must deal with. I do not think that the settlers are Israel and that Israel is a settler Israel yet, but we are approaching very quickly the point of no return. So I think it's really dramatic on this issue. And to say it in a sentence, perhaps there will be questions about it. I think that it's time not to wait for the grand, perfect peace. Because what the political class in Israel did, and much of this was done by the international community as well, we wasted 20, 25 years saying we will have full peace tomorrow.
Since Oslo.
Since Oslo, but even worse since 2000 or 2000. But yes, it began in Oslo, or just after Oslo. And we made, in my mind, there is a logical flaw. Because there are two issues, and we confuse the two. One is occupation. I think there is no doubt that occupation is lethal, politically, morally, demographically. But we combine it with a promise of peace. And we kept promising peace, and peace never showed up. And not only because of the settlers, because apparently there are some problems with some of the neighbors. So I think it's time, after 20 years of experimenting, it's time to adopt a different approach, which is let's deal with occupation on our own in a cautious, gradual way, while the Palestinians, in a cautious, gradual way, build their nation state. If peace is possible and final status agreement is signed, I'll be the first one to endorse it. I have no problem with any concessions. I just don't see it there.
So what's required of Israel to go at in other words, instead of leaping to the final settlement, which you think is politically probably untenable, despite John Kerry's best efforts and so on, what are the steps that will not just be dismissed as piddling, ultra-modest, insufficient steps in Gaza as well as the West Bank, in Jerusalem as well as the general West Bank?
First of all, let me say that I really admire the commitment and intention of Secretary Kerry. I think that his attempt to save the two-state solution is a benign one. But if, God forbid, he sticks only to plan A and does not prepare plan B, he might have the result of his effort will be exactly the opposite of what he tries to do. And the two-state solution might actually be buried. So what I think should be done?
What happens then? What does the map look like then?
Bad things. But
that's the kind of analytical insight.
But let me concentrate on the positive. I think that President Obama got it right last time in 2009 and got it wrong. I think we have to begin with a freeze. The freeze cannot be a total freeze as the president suggested. It should be beyond the blocks. But I think that if we'll have a freeze beyond the blocks, the bleeding of the two-state solution would stop. By the way, just like I think the centrifuges on Iran, there should be a total freeze. I think total freeze on centrifuges and total freeze on settlements. These are the two. First of all, you stop the deterioration of the situation. Then you begin to address the problem. I think, again, I would love a final status agreement to be agreed. If the secretary brings it, I'll be the first one to admit I was wrong and endorse it with enthusiasm. If, God forbid, I'm right, let's take steps of dismantling some settlements and creating a situation where every year the Palestinians have much more political space, geographic space, economic space, and they build in a kind of Fayyad kind of approach, they build their nation state while we deal with our malaise, which is occupation. Let's not peace or the expectation for peace be an obstacle preventing us from acting to end occupation.
I think there's a stack of questions somewhere that somebody's going to give me at a certain point very, very soon. Hint, hint, hint. Let me ask.
You ran out.
No, I have a long list. Like in the McCarthy hearings, I have a long list. What would be so terrible about a binational state? A one-state solution? Or is that just is that no solution at all
look,
and a recipe for...
In the old days,
very old days.
When we were young, people, many Palestinians said, what's wrong with it? And they said, oh, what's wrong with Lebanon? Look at Lebanon. Look at Syria. Look at the rest of the region. And tell me honestly, look me in the eye and say that you think this would work. And I'll tell you, I'll have a surprising authority on that. 13 years ago, I interviewed Professor Edward Said. And Edward Said, at the end of a long, interesting interview, said to me, Ari, I'm very concerned about your people because the Middle East is very cruel to its minorities. And at the end of the day, you are a minority. What conclusions he drew, I do not share.
They were.
This is an area, this is a region that is very intolerant to minorities, to any minority, Christian minorities, Jewish minorities, others. There is no way that a binational state will not end with real massacres, with the bloodshed, and with one people driven out of their land. So anyone talking about a binational state with some sort of calm is like anyone speaking about a nuclear Iran with some sort of calm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Both are deeply, it sounds nice, both are terribly dangerous, and anyone acknowledging the brutal reality of the Middle East cannot be sincere in supporting it.
There's a question from the left, thank you, that often comes up, thank you, is about how best from here to pressure Israel to do the right thing, even in the view that you're describing. And one of the means of pressure suggested all the time is boycott, divestment, don't come to Israel to perform if you're an entertainer, or bring your business there. What do you think of that?
Why do people of peace go into pressure? I don't believe in twisting arms this way or the other.
It's politics.
No. The reaction to anything like that would be to strengthen the Israeli right and to get us bogged down even more in the bad situation we are. The only way to contribute, in my mind, is to develop this realistic peace concept. I think that the main problem, the failure of the Israeli political elite, but of the international community, was that they did not represent reasonable Israelis with a reasonable, realistic peace concept. This is why we are stuck with the settlers and with the extreme right. Because as long as Israelis feel, again, middle-of-the-road Israelis, that what the world tells them, what the peace-loving people tell them, is completely detached from the reality they see all around them, they won't go for that and they will not take any risks. Mm-hmm. The only way to solve this problem is have a realistic peace process energized Israeli moderates.
Here's a good question from the audience. Can it still be said that the unwavering support for Israel by the United States is completely healthy for Israel, or has this unbiased support become harmful for Israel's future? Or you could challenge the suppositions here.
I think that although I acknowledge the fact that there was some abuse by some people in Israel of American goodwill. I'm not dismissing that. But at the end of the day, really, God help us if there is an American retreat from its support for Israel. At the end of the day, Israel is not only a Jewish state. It is a democracy. It is a free society that I think most of its citizens share American values and Western values. And if we will not see the great democracy and the small democracy working together in real alliance, with real intimacy, the implications will be disastrous.
You may have noticed that 10 days ago or so, Iran signed an interim nuclear agreement with the West, in effect. And the rationale in the Obama administration is that this is not a perfect agreement, but agreements that are diplomatic are never perfect. That's why they're called negotiations. And it's a hell of a lot better than the path that we were on, which was of development and then a potential military attack, which was in effect promised by the American administration if Iran reached the point of breakout capacity or weaponization. There's a debate about that as well. You seem very skeptical about this interim agreement. Why are you skeptical? And B, what do you think could have been achieved in the real world at that negotiating table that wasn't achieved?
First of all, what I would have liked is this total freeze that I'm talking about. I think this is, if sanctions are working, and if there is a genuine Iranian conversion, there is no reason for the Iranians not to agree to a total freeze. Because I'm not talking about dismantling it, but don't stop the centrifuges running. Stop the whole thing totally without any conditions, and then go into a very short, intensive, I'll put it in one sentence. While I think that on Palestine you need plan B, I think that on Iran you need plan A. You need to know where we really are. So I think the better deal would have been the freeze. But I'm not one of these people who went crazy against this deal, because I understand the rationale. And the rationale is, from the American point of view, from the administration
But actually, I don't see the difference between your position and the Netanyahu position, except
different.
for in the nuance of rhetoric on your side as opposed to the bombast on his.
First of all, rhetorics counts, but there is because he sticks to all his very ambitious goals, which I would love them to be real, but
his goal is that every last physics textbook in Iran be confiscated. This is not a genie that can be put back in the bomb.
So that's where I was.
It wouldn't be so terrible.
That's where I'm heading.
That's
I
not
understand
reality.
the administration's rationale. America is split on this. And I understand it. I think that actually what the administration is saying, perhaps without, what it's whispering is this. There's no military option because of what you said, because the Iranians will not unknow, we cannot unknow what the Iranians know. The sanctions are actually, we don't say it aloud, but sanctions are actually slower than the centrifuges. Therefore, we are in a bad position. We are trying to cut our losses and to stop it with this shaky deal. The problem with this rationale that it leads you to the acceptance of a nuclear Iran. And therefore, I'm not into, there's one claim that this is a historic success and the other claim that this is a historic failure. I'm for, this is an historic challenge. It's a fait accompli now. Let's stop arguing about that. But the 6 months now created are really crucial. And if you'll give me 2 minutes here, I really think that the Iran challenge is a dramatic challenge for Western civilization. It should not be an Israel issue. It should not be a Netanyahu issue. This is for the entire Western civilization, by the way, the entire humanity. I think that really the world we live in will be a different world if Iran goes nuclear. Now, we made so many mistakes. We handled it, all of us, over a decade, Americans, Israelis, Europeans. The Iranians are ahead of the game. They basically won the technological game. We cannot make another mistake. We cannot give them political victory. So let's not argue about the deal that was agreed upon. Let's use these 6 months with wisdom and courage. If the Iranians are really willing to totally abandon their nuclear project, I'll be the happiest person around. But if not so, let's be courageous in looking this in the eye. And the one thing I would really object to is like a series of interim agreements, that by the end of this period of time, they say, well, okay, another one. These 6 months are dramatic. Let's look at it and let's deal with it, because this is really, in my mind, the most dramatic challenge we all face now.
And where does the Israeli nuclear program fit into this view of what will be in the Middle East?
I haven't got a clue what you were talking about.
No, I forgot. That's interesting, because there's an entire chapter in your book about the nuclear program, which your father may or may not have worked on. You understand the convention that Ari is playing with here, which is that when you are reading the Israeli media about the nuclear program, you have to use the phrase, according to foreign media reports.
The New Yorker says that.
Yeah. Sure, blame it on me. Yeah. But that is you have a nuclear capacity, a very serious nuclear capacity. To say nothing of an alliance with the United States and Europe and the rest. Why is what George Kennan used to call containment impossible? And how in the modern world of modern science do you envision a nuclear-free Iran forever? Let's stipulate that we agree on the nature of the regime, which is actually a complex subject, but let's stipulate just for the moment that we do. How is it possible to put the genie back in the bottle to the degree to which the Israeli government insists? And why is it absolutely necessary, considering not only that, but your newfound alliances with Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and all the rest?
So first of all, I'll refer shortly to what you asked in the beginning. I think that if Israel has a nuclear program and a nuclear capability, it's exact opposite of the settlement project. Because Israel is an endangered nation. It experiences many wars. And it proved to be extremely responsible in this field. While in other fields we were so reckless, in this sensitive field we were astonishingly mature. And I think that basically the world turned a blind eye to what happened in the Lebanon because it acknowledged Jewish history, it acknowledges the existential threats we face, and it trusted us to be mature. And in this specific field, we were mature. And this is the reason I cannot, the fact, as I told you in some other occasion, the fact that this absurd way of talking about it is actually part of a dovish, responsible approach to say that if we have it, we will behave as if we don't have it unless there is doomsday. There is the fact that contrary to reckless Israeli behavior in almost every field, in this, we never abuse this.
This is a country that considers itself to have the equanimity of that you describe, and yet it used it not only on Hiroshima, but felt it necessary to use it a second time in Nagasaki. How can one count on that kind of maturity in eternity?
First of all, If you'll arrange a nuclear-free world, I'm all for it.
Right.
But I'm just saying, you asked about Israel, that's the answer about it. Now, regarding Iran, and I'll try to make it short. I'm very troubled by this. If Iran goes nuclear, Saudi Arabia will go nuclear within days.
By
or
simply
weeks.
buying a device.
Not buying, they bought it. They just have to deliver it from the shelves in Pakistan.
They don't have Amazon there or something?
And within a very short period of time, Egypt, Turkey, Algeria, others will go nuclear. Israel will have to change its nuclear policy. You will have a multipolar nuclear system in the world's most unstable, irrational, and violent area. Now, I urge Americans to think about the fact that although we will have energy independence soon, the Middle East will still come. If the Middle East becomes hellish, everybody's life will change. So it's exactly
this is a future
it's exactly
tense?
the issue. It's the issue you said. I mean, the greatest achievement of Western, not only of international, the Russians contributed to, of Western diplomacy since Nagasaki, just what you talked about, is that we, by and large, controlled the nuclear genie. I mean, India, we controlled it. If, God forbid, Iran goes nuclear, this is not only Iran going nuclear. This is the 21st century going nuclear. The result of Iran going nuclear will be Middle East nuclear abilities, third world nuclear abilities. You will not be able to stop it. So this is really dramatic. And when I see our failure over the last decade, again, by everybody, in addressing this, we wasted so much energy on Iraq and Afghanistan, and we on all kinds of, when we should have dealt with this in a very assertive diplomatic way years back, and we should still do it now when it's the very last moment. If we don't do it, perhaps we will not feel the consequences in 2 or 3 years' time, but within a decade or two, our lives will change, and the time to deal with it is now.
Ari, it's not lost on anybody here that the region is, you say that it'll be a nightmare in the future. It's a nightmare now. There's a war just over the Golan Heights that's now killed 120,000 people and millions of refugees. Polio has started in the streets of Damascus. Children are dying of hunger. The possible outcome of that is a fracturing of Syria. One even hears of a fracturing of Saudi Arabia. One hears even a possibility of all the arrangements made by polite Frenchmen and Englishmen, Sykes and Picot, collapsing entirely, which leads to the side question, ever so cynical, would Uganda have been such a bad idea? But okay, well, let's leave that to the side for a second. What does this rapid, it's not Arab Spring, it's something far more complex and with far darker hues in many corners than that. What does this mean for the region, and what does it mean for Israel?
So first of all, it goes right back to where we started our conversation. Look, the traditional Palestinian and anti-Zionist criticism of Zionism was that this is an artificial movement, colonialist, that is creating this artificial entity. Now, what do you see now? As I said, the reality on the ground shows that there was a need to have Israel, that Israel is not artificial. It was created artificially, but the need to have it was so much there. And yet what you see that right now, what does prove to be artificial is the Arab nation state. When you look around the Middle East, there are no Iraqis anymore. There are just Sunnis, Shiites, and Kurds. There are no Syrians anymore. You see what they're doing to each other. There are no Lebanese anymore. There are no Libyans anymore. The only real country with a deep identity...
I left Libya, Benghazi and Tripoli are
split, totally split. This is the result. And the only country that has a deep identity that is maintained is Egypt, that is different than all the others. So you see that the Arab nation state was, as you said, it was created by colonialist power, and it was kept by tyranny. And when tyranny weakened, the whole thing implodes, and you have like clay throughout the region. But while this is very disturbing, and I really hope that the Arabs will find a way of finding benign, modern nationalism and a way to run their affairs, there is actually great potential there. And this is where I look for creative leadership and statesmanship in the international community. Because right now, as you rightly said, the Sunnis and the Jews were never so close. And the irony, look, I was in, we were in a television studio a few weeks ago, Charlie Rose, and you remember there was a Saudi guest and his entourage. They were all over me as if I was their best friend. They wanted my signed book. Now, 2 years ago, they would not have shaken my hand.
It's because they wanted to sell it on eBay. They need the revenue.
So I actually think, talking of new peace concept, I think that with the right creative approach, clay can be played with. And the fact that the Saudis and the Gulf countries and Jordanians and Egyptians are actually looking for new ways to run the Middle East and are willing to see Israel as part of a strategic partnership, I think there is much hope there, but this will not be the kind of peace that we had in the past. There will not be any White House lawn ceremonies. But if we adopt a practical, pragmatic approach, I think of all this mess and chaos, actually we can see some good news.
Ari, in 2000, how are you doing out there? You all right? You still awake? You all right? It's okay? All right. We won't keep you forever, but a couple more. One of them was reflected in here. In 2008, Barack Obama was elected president. This was not received in all corners of Israel with absolute jubilation, as I remember. Now, some of this might have been the natural inclination of the press, not the New Yorker, of course, to find the worst racist voice and go and hear and all the things that you could find in parts of America as well. But I think if you do go talk to journalistic, political, diplomatic elites in Israel, and you talk about Obama for more than 5 minutes, the words naive, not handling the Middle East skillfully, and I don't mean just the Israeli and Israeli-Palestinian question, you hear this over and over again. And I have to say, without being a reflexive apologist, I don't quite understand that point of view. Obama is withdrawn from Iraq. This is not God knows, a clean situation, and Iraq is a mess, but it's unclear to me how much more damage that we could do. Eventually from Afghanistan. The efforts are underway between Israel and Palestine. There are efforts underway that seem at least partially successful with the Iranian nuclear issue, with promises both on sanctions and even a potential, as they say, all options are on the table there. I don't see why, in general, the political class is so dismissive to this day, left, right, and center of Obama.
I'll say two things, first of all. One, I think that President Obama is much more popular in Israel than he is in Saudi Arabia.
That's great. That's great.
Two, I think that in large quarters of Israeli media and political class, President Obama is much more popular than Benjamin Netanyahu. So it's not that. I mean, there were few dark moments. I think.
But that's at Haaretz and maybe not at...
No. I think if you check Yediot Ahronoth and so on, I think that there's much more Netanyahu bashing than Obama bashing in large parts of the Israeli media and public opinion and the political class. So let's relax, first of all. I mean, Israelis are critical, suspicious, neurotic. Generally, they don't like leaders. They don't like power. We are anarchists. So we love Bill Clinton and we love King Hussein. These were our heroes.
Which was because of...
Clinton?
Yeah.
his emotional ability. I mean, he hugged us. I mean, Israelis are so cynical and sophisticated. Give them a hug and they are yours. So really, I mean, nothing like, no Israeli was as popular as President Clinton. But now seriously, I mean, there was a dark moment. The dark moment was after the Cairo speech. I mean, there were like real fears in the summer of 2009 when I think really the president was deeply unpopular. We came a long way since. I think the picture is much more nuanced. And yet...
Was the Cairo speech a mistake?
I would have changed a few sentences.
And they are?
I think there was... And let me begin with something else. I think that had the Cairo... I'll tell you what I thought the president was trying to do, and I thought it was in some ways remarkable. I thought that he was actually trying to give young Arabs a role model, that as their leadership did not give them, he was actually trying to. And there was something inspiring in that. While doing that, I think he was a bit too soft on some darker side of Arab political life. But I think the problem was, I mean, in some ways he inspired the Arab Spring, and he had probably an indirect effect of that. But the Middle East takes maintenance. There's a lot of maintenance involved. And in a way, the speech should have been followed by a very active policy. And I'm not sure that that was always the case, although there were benign attempts made. But let me touch the sensitive issue. I think that the problematic relationship between the president and the prime minister saddens me deeply. Because at the end of the day, I think that the two great challenges, dealing with Iran and dealing with occupation, are up to these two gentlemen. And the fact that there is so much bitterness and so much lack of trust is regrettable. And I think it's true that Netanyahu is a conservative, Republican-like Israeli, and President Obama is a liberal progressive from Chicago. I think middle ground could have been found, and I think there is a lot of the tension, the poison in the relationship, could have been taken out, and I deeply regret it.
Ari, I want to thank you and tell you that Ari's going to sign books afterwards, which is a very, very broad hint in the retail business, but much more profoundly than you can meet Ari afterwards, get your book signed, but I really want to urge you to read this book, read it thoroughly, read it carefully. In my view, it's the most nuanced book, the most beautiful book in its way, about Israel by an Israeli since Amos Alon's book, The Israelis, which was published just after the Six-Day War. Quite a prophetic book, which deserves going back to as well. Ari Shavit, my good friend, thank you very much.
Thank you.